Luis Garavito, serial killer, who killed more than 300 people, in a small, misty town nestled in the coffee-growing hills of Quito, Colombia. A baby boy named Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos opened his eyes to the world in 1957. The air smelled of fresh soil and green leaves. It was a place where farmers rose with the dawn and children played barefoot in the fields. Luis grew up in a large and very poor family. The home was crowded, but full of the sounds of life: clattering pans, murmured prayers, and the laughter of siblings running in and out of the tiny house. He was the eldest son, thin, dark-haired, and often shy. Even in childhood, he had a sharp gaze, as if he were watching and memorizing everything. From the outside, life looked simple: church on Sundays, chores during the week, school in the mornings. But inside, Luis's world was not always gentle. The family struggled to feed everyone, and his father was a strict, heavy-handed man. Discipline was harsh, and there was very little comfort. His mother, overwhelmed by the endless work of raising so many children, could not always shield him from the hardships. At school, Luis tried to be a normal child. Teachers later remembered a boy who sometimes smiled when he was praised for reading aloud. He liked drawing little sketches in the margins of his notebooks, and dreamed, briefly, of becoming a teacher or a priest. But his grades were inconsistent, and he was often distracted, which made him an easy target for teasing by classmates. As he reached his teens, life pushed Luis into adult responsibilities. Early, he began taking small jobs helping shopkeepers, running errands, or working on nearby farms, anything to earn a little money to bring home. He moved from one small town to another, searching for stability and identity. During this time, he also became deeply involved in religious events and community activities. People remembered a polite young man who dressed neatly and spoke softly. He liked to help at church fairs, and he was skilled at striking up conversations with strangers. Outwardly, Luis appeared to be a quiet, hardworking youth trying to build a future for himself. But behind this outward life, there was a deep loneliness. Friends would come and go, jobs would start and end, and Luis never stayed anywhere for long. His early experiences of hardship and instability left him restless and uncertain of who he wanted to be. By the late 1970s, the boy from Quito had grown into a man who was still wandering from place to place, trying to fit into society. He experimented with different roles: salesman, volunteer, laborer, but nothing lasted. The world saw a polite, sometimes charming man, but he was increasingly isolated inside. This was Luis Garavito's Balo Cal, the chapter of his life when he was still just another young Colombian trying to escape poverty and find meaning. It was the time when his story could still have gone another way, before the darker side of his life emerged. In the coffee-covered hills of Genova, Colombia, morning mist clung to the red earth as the sun rose slowly over the mountains. Here, a shy boy named Luis Garavito was growing up. Hardship and poverty had already taught him to think like an adult long before he should have. The boy who once sat quietly at his school desk was now a teenager. His notebooks were still filled with doodles, sometimes little prayers, sometimes sketches of the faraway hills. As he grew older, the weight of responsibility in his family increased. Luis helped his younger siblings with small tasks, ran errands to the market, and supported his overworked mother wherever he could. After school, he was often seen looking for small jobs unloading goods at a shop, working briefly on farms, or running errands for neighbors. The pay was small, but bringing it home gave him a sense of pride. People in the town began to know him as a polite and quiet young man, someone who could talk easily to others and who was always ready to help. Inside Luis, however, two worlds were forming: one filled with dreams and imagination, where he would finish his studies, do good work, and maybe one day become a teacher. The other filled with harsh reality, where money was scarce, opportunities were few, and every day was a struggle. This push and pull made him restless. During his teenage years, Luis became deeply involved in religious events and community programs. Whether it was a church festival or a local fair, he was eager to participate. People saw him as a gentle, smiling, responsible youth. He wanted respect, friendship, and a place to belong. Yet his eyes sometimes showed a quiet loneliness. Because of work and the search for new opportunities, he moved from one town to another. He rarely stayed in one place for long. His friendships were often temporary. Someone would come into his life for a short while, and then drift away. In these teenage years, a restless character was slowly forming within him. A young man searching for direction, but not finding it. Outwardly he was still polite and soft-spoken, but inwardly he felt uncertain and adrift. This period was Luis Garavito's teenage chapter, when he was still just a young Colombian trying to fight his way out of poverty, balancing responsibilities with dreams. It was the time when his life could still have gone another way, when his story could have ended very differently. As Luis Garavito stepped out of his teenage years and into adulthood, the pressures around him and the struggles inside him began to grow more complex. He was a young man trying to find his place in a world of poverty, instability, and unmet hopes. At first, it showed only his small restlessness, sleeping less at night, keeping his thoughts to himself, finding it harder to trust others. Outwardly he still appeared polite and soft-spoken, but inside, he was becoming more closed off. Several forces were shaping this slow drift. Economic pressure. He could not find steady work. Each job was temporary, each move just another stop along a long road. This constant uncertainty chipped away at his confidence. Lack of stable relationships. Because he moved so often, friendships and connections were brief. Trust became harder, and isolation grew stronger. Unresolved past experiences. Memories of hardship and instability from his early life stayed with him. Without help or guidance, they turned into quiet burdens. These things together created a kind of dual life. On the outside, Luis was a cooperative, polite man who joined in community activities. On the inside, he was increasingly lonely and adrift. He began to keep secrets, to compartmentalize parts of his life, to hide what he was thinking. As time went on, the isolation deepened. In an effort to win respect and feel important, he sometimes exaggerated his role in events or presented himself under different guises. This acting made his outward life look busy and useful, while his inner life became more complicated and withdrawn. Another major factor was his inability to manage his emotions and needs. Without professional help or stable guidance, he tried to soothe his inner turmoil with temporary fixes, occasional alcohol, moving to new places, taking up short-term work. None of these solved the deeper issues. Signs of this slow shift included more secrecy, becoming quieter about his personal life, hiding his movements and plans, self-centered planning, making choices mainly to meet his own needs, without explaining them to others, ability to draw people in, learning to gain people's trust easily with politeness and helpfulness, obsessive thinking, certain ideas or plans circling in his head repeatedly, shaping his decisions over time. All of this didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, a chain of small decisions, hidden habits, and unaddressed problems building over the years. To outsiders, he still seemed like a gentle, helpful man. That outward image allowed him to keep moving while his inner life changed shape. Eventually, when this hidden inner world grew stronger than the outer mask, his choices and actions began to move down a darker and more alarming path. But that is the next chapter. This part was the preparation, the shadow settling over the dust, the time when a life begins to bend in a new direction. As Luis grew into a young man, his life became more complex. Small hidden habits, private thoughts, and loneliness slowly began to shape his behavior. To outsiders, he still appeared polite and helpful. Yet some people began to notice a subtle difference, a tendency to be more withdrawn, to think first of himself, and occasionally to act in unexpected ways. He started forming connections with people in ways that made them easily trust him. Small events or decisions that seemed ordinary on the surface were, for him, part of a larger, private plan. In this way, his life gradually moved toward a mysterious shadow. No one noticed the change all at once. It was a slow, long process, the result of small habits and choices accumulating over time, quietly preparing the path for events yet to come. As Luis stepped into young adulthood, the loneliness, lack of control, and frustration in his life steadily grew. He tried to understand the unrest within himself, but found no proper guidance or path. One day, this inner turmoil first expressed itself outwardly. It happened through a small incident seemingly ordinary from the outside, but for him, it fulfilled a private need. During this time, a pattern of secret practice began focused on his imagination, personal needs, and attempts to exert control. Outsiders didn't notice much, because he still maintained polite and courteous behavior. The main reasons behind this first incident were inner loneliness and mental stress. Experiences from his childhood and teenage years had accumulated and now influenced his decisions. Need for control. Life and circumstances felt unstable to him, so he sought ways to manage and influence his surroundings. Environmental factors. Unsteady jobs, temporary relationships, and social isolation encouraged him to explore a private inner world. This first incident marked the beginning of his shadow. It was subtle, outwardly ordinary, yet it left an important imprint on his personality. In this way, the first shadow began to push his life slowly toward darkness. After the first incident, Luis learned how to attract people and manage situations to fulfill his private needs. Gradually, his mind began to identify a pattern. Now, his focus was no longer on a single person. He realized that in certain situations, his influence over others could grow steadily. He ran small experiments, observing who was easy to befriend, who responded naturally to his words, and whose reactions matched his private plans. At this stage, his actions became more regular and patterned. Each new target served purposes such as observation and learning, understanding how people reacted in different situations, building trust, drawing people toward him naturally, managing circumstances, exercising subtle control within limited situations. Each new incident was a step forward, a small experiment, which seemed ordinary or invisible to the outside world. But these experiments gradually became habits, and his inner restlessness grew stronger. Over time, he developed a shadow routine invisible to others, but deeply shaping his thoughts and behavior. Each new target helped him refine his methods, slowly pushing his life further into darkness. Inside Luis was a long-standing loneliness, frustration, and a lack of control over his own life. Experiences from his childhood and teenage years had created a subtle but persistent inner pressure that gradually shaped his actions. The main reasons behind his behavior were 1. A need for control and power. Life often felt unpredictable and unstable. His experiments with people and private habits gave him a sense of mastery over situations he could otherwise not manage. 2. A way to cope with mental and emotional stress. His inner restlessness and isolation drove him to develop private routines that temporarily helped him feel in control. 3. Observation and learning. Each interaction allowed him to understand human behavior better and test his own strategies. 4. A need to assert his presence. The outside world rarely felt welcoming or simple for him, so he created a private inner world to satisfy emotional needs. In short, his actions were not simply about harming others. They were a reflection of internal turmoil, a search for control, and coping with deep loneliness. Total victims. Luis Garavito admitted to killing around 138 people, mostly children and young teenagers, though investigators believe the actual number could be over 300. His targets were generally young boys aged 6 to 16, often chosen because they were vulnerable and easy to approach. How he selected his victims. He looked for children who were isolated, trusting, or easy to interact with. Places like schools, parks, and rural areas provided opportunities for him to observe and test his influence over them. Pattern of behavior. Over time, Garavito developed a routine pattern. He carefully observed potential targets. He gained their trust through friendliness and persuasion. He manipulated situations to fulfill his personal psychological needs. Capture. Authorities began noticing a disturbing pattern of disappearances in Colombia. After thorough investigation, tracking, and interviews, the police arrested Luis Garavito in 1999. Trial and sentence. During the trial, Garavito confessed to many crimes, providing investigators with crucial information. Sentence: he was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, though Colombian law limits actual imprisonment to 40 to 50 years. This sentence is one of the longest ever recorded in modern criminal history. Aftermath: Garavito is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in the world. His case led to increased awareness about child safety, missing children, and preventive measures in Colombia and globally. Investigators, psychologists, and journalists studied his life to understand the psychological factors behind his crimes, including childhood trauma, isolation, and patterns of obsessive behavior. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and subscribe.